Let's run through my diagram. Inanna's me law is meiosis, which is me is OS, meaning the operating system of the me is meiosis, which is the divine law of the masculine and feminine principle embedded in the process of the body's system of creating genetic diversity. Meiosis and mitosis. First, I want to start off by telling you how I got the information and just kind of explain a little bit how my process works, because I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm typically just going with the flow, and codes are coming to me through dreams and through downloads or whatever the case may be that I hear. And I pretty much decode on the spot on that day exactly what comes to me. And it's a natural rhythm or progression or build on top of the things that I've already produced. So we've gone from creating diagrams for the light body and the OS and how the command prompts are the OS of the light body. However, when you talk about the me, which is something that was kind of perplexing me a little bit, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper, but I just didn't know where to look, and I didn't know where that answer was going to come from. So I revisited the text from the Lost Book of Inky about 3 nights ago. So I was reading the text, I went to bed, and I had this weird dream that I was in this temple that was above and below ground. It was like two Egyptian temples, one on top, one on the bottom. However, the one underneath is the one I kept visiting. And I went in there several times, but I was perplexed at how I was in the upside down, but everything was still upside. Basically, it was just kind of a weird dream where I kept going into these two temples just to see like how the temple itself was flipping upside down. And I'm not entirely sure what that has to do with anything. But when I woke up in the morning, the first thought that came to my mind as soon as I cracked my eyes open was, the me is meiosis. And I said, oh, me is OS, which is the operating system, which I have been talking about all along. When we think about the masculine and feminine principle, you're talking about the difference between air and fire and earth and water. And these two particular energies, or these two energies, are working with each other on a consistent basis for pretty much everything that we see in existence. It is a solid principle that works in nature in a myriad of ways. Hydrogen and oxygen combine to form water. Plants use sunlight and soil nutrients to grow. Positive and negative charges engage in order to create electrical current. In other words, these two principles are always engaging on every level throughout the planet. Also, positive and negative are part of mathematics, as well as the division of both, which is the same thing that happens with procreation and how I teach on this channel, that 22 divided by 7 is pi, or the irrational number of creation, basically unlimited amounts of creativity between the masculine and feminine principle. So these two principles are embedded in meiosis through the process of PMAT, which is basically chromosomes coming together, pairing for likeness, and going through 4 phases of combination, tearing apart, and then recombination until it's refined. Basically, the very nature of this law is embedded in the biological process of males and females' bodies. Since I started this channel, I have been teaching that the 10 commandments are the command prompts of the light body versus it being a flesh-based law, which is like thou shalt not commit this and that, but more so operating system of the analog body, which teaches you what you can do in terms of keeping the bugs out of your light system. The 10 commandments were given to Moses, but in my version is more of a form of osmosis. And the osmosis process is the process of taking one thing and putting it through a membrane and it coming out something else on the other side. So in my case, this OS system, which is governing the light body or the analog body, would be the flesh as the membrane. So if we're talking about a solar reset where your light body has to meet a certain standard vibrationally, we're talking about the guidelines to straighten out or upgrade your OS and govern your light body so you can meet the sun where it is. And we're also talking about coming out of the flesh, or being able to come through the membrane of the flesh, which is a process of osmosis or refinement. There's also another form of this process called mitosis, which I unscrambled to mean is Tim OS, and the name Tim reminded me of Timothy of the Bible. So of course I went to Timothy in order to find some clues as to what this could lead to or what it could mean. And when I went to look at Timothy, I learned that Timothy served as a bishop in the temple of Artemis. Artemis is also an anagram for is me art. And what other scripture states anything about art? Well, our Father which art in heaven. I believe this was my cue in terms of knowing exactly what the art meant, even though I've been doing a lot of art in terms of these diagrams. So I kind of figured it was something like that. But when you talk about art in the Bible, this is where it led me to the temple of Artemis. I also want to point out that yesterday, after immediately posting my diagram, I saw this particular announcement by NASA talking about the launch of the program Artemis 2. So, how succinct is that? This type of stuff happens to me all the time. I always get an immediate follow up with something that I mentioned in a diagram or something in the future that transpires about something that I already previously decoded. So, do with that information what you will. Now, I didn't include everything that I researched and how all the dots connected to everything else that I did in this particular diagram, but I did do a much deeper dive. And part of that included me taking Timothy's mother's name, which was Eunice, breaking that down to EU ice. N, okay, and N is the 14th letter, which is 5, which again ties back to the Ankh and the fifth dimension and all those things we've spoken of. And EU is also Europa, which is Jupiter, which led me to Thursday, which is the 5th day of the week. So there you have a 5 and a 5, and you also have this ice ring around Jupiter. So to me, the ice was already connected to Europa, which made it about Jupiter, which made it about the 5th day of the week. Okay, so I was already really hot on the trail in terms of what this particular anagram was all about, and all of the dots were connecting. Also, another fun tidbit is that EU is also europium, and europium is used in security inks, okay? Like inks used to verify certain documents. So we're talking about inks and inky, which can be linked to europium. Now, the story of how Inanna got the Mies is hilarious to me. Basically, she sneaks up on Inky and it wants to see the Mies and, gets him drunk. Basically, he's so busy looking at her body that he's so distracted that he goes into a deep sleep, and she takes him to her skyboat, right? And the skyboat is a representation of our Father which art in heaven, and heaven is likened to the air or fire, the sun energy. So the air or the skyboat would be linked to Inky, or the father or the grandfather of the 10 Commandments, versus Inanna's new version, which would be the OS version or the light body version, basically. This also reminded me of something one of my followers by the name of C, shout out to C, gave me this little tidbit on the scripture where Jesus says, "No man cometh to the Father but by me." Okay, so basically it's saying in this particular scripture, if you read between the lines, that the Father is in heaven, which can be the air and the sun. And if we're talking about the solar reset, you can't get to the Father but by me, meaning upgrading your OS of your light photon body through the heart chakra of love in order for you to meet the sun energetically where it is. And then you can come to the Father or be a part of the light. There is mention of there being 94 me's that basically can govern a civilized society, and it covers a myriad of topics from art to music, etc. However, I look at this numerical value as 9 plus 4 equals 13, which ties into the 13th bloodline, of course, as I've been teaching on this channel, in regards to the birth of the man-child, the two Christ, two witnesses giving birth to this son that causes the solar reset, as well as the number 4, which is the 4th commandment or the heart chakra, where you would lighten your feather basically, or become my ox through confession and forgiveness. This is the emerald throne as depicted in Revelations 4. And basically the 4th gate is how you lighten your body from top to bottom by doing all your labor and all your work, which is confession and forgiveness. So when it comes to the masculine and feminine principle, the representation that we have of that is the 5th commandment, which says, "Honor thy father and thy mother." But I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into father and mother and honor and see what that translation meant, or how things were translated through time. The Hebrew word for honor is kavod, which means weight, gravity, density, and substance. When you talk about weight, gravity, density, and substance, we're talking about the physical emanation of your matter-based body. You're talking about the science of existence and being a matter-based human being. And that can only happen through meiosis and mitosis. The Hebrew word for father is av, which if you flip that around, it becomes va, like yod, he, vav, he. Right? And for mother is M, which if you flip that around, it becomes me. I also wanted to explore any anagrams that existed within the word kavad, and I actually found the word vaka. Now, I almost dismissed this before I actually looked into the process of what it takes to create vaka, and it turns out that vaka is the most distilled and purified version of liquor, okay? And when you talk about a soul being created through the process of meiosis, you're also talking about the soul or the spirit of an alcoholic beverage. We're talking about two processes of refinement. Both meiosis and vaka both go through a process of division, distillation, separation, reduction, and refinement. It wasn't on my bingo card to use vaka as an example, but it actually fits and helps to explain this process quite well. I also thought about the fact that it could be oak DV, which oak reminds me of oak trees. And of course, DV would be the division, which is the genetic branching, right? And oak trees being the roots or the foundation of your family tree. So that fit as well. Oak trees are the heaviest, most dense rooted trees. So that fits the definition of kavod perfectly. Sometime last year, I wanted to study the process of meiosis. So I dug a little bit deep in determining, okay, what exactly it is and how it works. And one of the things that stood out to me was the initial phase, which is the prophase 1, where basically you have two chromosomes that pair together based on likeness, meaning that I have this gene for blue eyes and so do you. So let's get together. And it's like they are initially drawn to each other, which stood out to me as somewhat of a twin flame type of energetic process. So that led me to think about that and keep that filed into the back of my mind as, hey, this is something that's happening on a biological level within all of our bodies when it's going through this process. What about it being something that happens on a level where we have another soul or another being that shares our likeness that we are automatically connected or drawn to, which led me to twin flames. This led me down the rabbit hole of photon light because if we do have a soul, it definitely would be photon light energy. And I wanted to see whether or not photon light can split itself. And that was actually found to be true scientifically not too long ago through a particular study saying that photon light can split itself and exist in two different spaces. So this made me think that, hey, it's quite possible that you have two beings that have the exact same photon light split into the polarity of masculine and feminine, just like the process of meiosis, just like all of the other energetic frequencies that align with the masculine feminine principle on an earth level. So this for me kind of doubly confirms that and kind of overlaps exactly everything I've been teaching about the twin flame energy, the two witnesses, and the power of them being one soul and two bodies. One key thing I noticed while reading scripture, especially in the book of Genesis, when they talk about the creation of Adam and Eve and how it says that God took his rib, okay, and created Eve, which doesn't make sense unless you're looking at it on a symbolic level. And lately, this has been a thought on my mind in regards to their genetic connection, because how can you take a rib and you not share the same DNA? So basically, it's a hint that these two individuals share a genetic marker or same genetic markers in some way. They are related genetically, okay? So in other words, this would make Adam's rib deoxyribonucleic acid, deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. This made me want to look more into the seventh commandment, which is thou shalt not commit adultery. And what I found was that the word commit wasn't always there. It was something added based on what they felt or the scholars felt needed more context, which is the word for adultery, which is na'af. So initially it stated thou shalt not na'af. That's it. No commit. And in my opinion, the word itself stands alone because it means to pollute, debase, or add something to a pure substance. So if something is pure and it already exists as it is, there's no such thing necessarily as commit. It's basically like adding an additional act as a morality to it. Na'af stands as a pure substance, and basically you're not to pollute it. This particular word, na'af, stood out to me so strongly by saying it was a pure substance being defiled or debased, right? So when you think about it in the context of adultery or committing adultery or being in a covenant or a marriage, right? If something is pure, it aligns more with you being the same photon light energy split into two bodies versus it being you just marrying whoever you want according to the laws of the land and man. What you're talking about is a union that is divine, that supersedes all other unions you can possibly come up with. It is a pure connection or a pure substance, and you are not to defile it. So it is a divine union, okay? And na'af stood out to me as a very strong word that conveys that we all have a twin flame connection. Now, I do realize this is a very sticky topic to discuss when you're talking about the masculine and feminine as a principle and as a divine law. In regards to the way that I teach the command prompts, they're not about condemnation or morality. What I am giving are guidelines for the light body and how to meet the light as it is, or match the energetic frequency of the light and not have lower vibratory frequencies within your body. So this is all about following those guidelines or following this divine law or this OS so that you can be an energetic match for the sun, okay? Whether you choose to do that or not is your own business. I'm just here to teach basically what it is that I'm finding, and I can hope that many will find or glean something from this understanding. So basically, the sun is the gate, or what you would consider to be the judge, and You can only interface with it if you are following the operating system of the me. And that is not me judging, okay? I am just giving you the me so you can understand how to govern your light body or raise your vibration and your frequency to be an energetic match for the sun's energy at the solar reset. I hope you enjoyed this message. Please like, share, and subscribe, and put a comment down in the comments just to let me know what you think of this content overall. Keep shining bright. Peace, love, and light.